Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
Well, there we go. It is the 19th day of December as we record this episode of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. Welcome in. I'm Dave Trafford. And for those of you watching on the YouTube, I'm just showing off two Christmas gifts. I got my Toronto Maple Leafs cap that I got at the Old Boys Hockey Chris Kringle gathering last week. And I'll show you the gift I got from the Story Studio Network CEO, my own Story Studio Network original hoodie. So we had good fun yesterday. We had our Festivus party with the team, and all looking forward to good things in 2025. And at the end of the party, got notice that we just signed another big contract. This one dealing with Indigenous issues in here in Canada. So excited to tell you all about that once we get to it. So, but in the meantime, we got lots to talk about today. Usually this is kind of a sleepy, quiet week. I remember talking to Tim Hudak when we came back from August. The session was usually sleepy and usually quiet, not so in the summer. I mean, you would have thought that would have been the peak of all of the action and excitement around this part of the world politically. Not so. Last week we dealt with the questions around, Prime Minister Trudeau being the proud feminist. And then, Monday, did he get the double birds. Anyway, we're going to get into all of that. But first, let's get to the team. Here we go. Kathleen Wynne is here. She is the former Premier of Ontario. Tim Hudak, the former Progressive Conservative leader here in Ontario. And John Wright. He is our veteran pollster and just one of the founding members here on the Ledge. And just quickly, around the table. I mean, I don't know where that all started or where I first took a deep breath and said, what the hell? We were all talking Monday morning at 9 o'clock or 9:01. The lead story in the news, Kathleen Wynne, was the fall economic statement, and then 9:06, boom, the Globe and Mail notification in my phone says, oh, she just quit. Nobody saw that coming, and apparently Prime Minister was among them.
Yeah, Jane and I were out walking the dogs, and I came back and I had all these messages saying, what do you think? Give me a call. It's like, what the heck has happened? So, and people who I would have expected would have known, Dave, had absolutely no idea. So this was, Chrystia Freeland reacting to what she saw as an untenable situation. And I don't think we can argue with that, being told that you're going to be shuffled out of a portfolio on Friday, that you're supposed to deliver a major report, the fall economic statement, on Monday. She wasn't going to do it. So yeah, it was a shock and a disruption in the force.
Well, it was a self-inflicted wound, Tim. I mean, seriously, who in their right mind thought, I'm firing you today, but just before you leave, could you do one more thing for me? I mean, what world does that make any sense?
Yeah, you cannot be blindsided, and it's hard to imagine how you could be blindsided and not anticipate that scenario, given, the breakdown relationship between the finance minister and the prime minister had been ongoing and getting worse. So that is evidence alone that the leadership of Prime Minister Trudeau is well past its best before date. Number two, I've been a fan of Chrystia Freeland. I've enjoyed the times I've interacted with her before she's in politics, and I thought that was a really gutsy, strong move. It will be seen as an unsurvivable gut shot to the Prime Minister. But I think for her own bona fides as a leader, a strong individual, to come out that clearly on principle, say that you're sticking around, and to go on offense when the Prime Minister and his team had really besmirched her reputation and undermined her for weeks. God bless her. I mean, good for her doing that. My third comment on this is I don't get the Mark Carney infatuation either, which seemed to be the camel that broke the straw's back here. Like, Mark Carney must be like a fentanyl to Prime Minister Trudeau, this strange addiction to somebody who I don't even know if it's going to be successful in politics. The gambit to try to bring him in, push Freeland out, was a fatal last decision by this prime minister, who I expect will announce his resignation by Christmas.
Well, but even John, that when you look at it that way, this has just been this slow, painful end, cut by, death by 1,000 cuts feel to it, as Tim describes, because the Mark Carney thing just didn't come up last Thursday. This has been in the wings for a long time.
Yeah, and I agree with all the comments that have been made, so I'll just kind of brush over that. I think the more important thing is just, for me, what was not so much her exquisite timing following former cabinet minister Sean Fraser's announcement. I mean, she stuck it in between his leaving the podium and cabinet beginning only within 10 minutes, and it just blew up everything. Was just how powerful the prime minister is in terms of holding together his grip on the country, in terms of its governance. There is no mechanism to move this prime minister out. There isn't in almost every legislature across the country and every political party. There have been some changes for the federal party, that's for sure. But, we've essentially seen and heard nothing of the prime minister since that happened, except a couple of fundraising, the fundraising event and the Christmas event. And beyond that, he's been uncommunicative. So this really speaks to the issue when the polls now show the Liberals at approximately 18 to 20%, shows them only holding on to about 45 seats in the entire country. The government in chaos, literally in chaos, and nothing can be done, nor if the prime minister decides to, let's just say, he decides to not pack it in within the next few days, but to actually go on vacation with his family. It could be weeks before we hear from him on what he wants to do. So it's an interesting situation where the prime minister, is able to carry on and do as he wishes when he's in one of the most vulnerable spots any politician has been in this country in decades.
Well, let me suggest, though, that it doesn't sound like there's any movement or any intention. I realize the line is he's in contemplation and, he's thinking about what he may or may not want to do. But, boy, when he showed up at the Christmas caucus meeting and gathering in Ottawa this week, he was just I don't mean to diminish it, but it sounded as if he's just brushing this off.
Like most families, sometimes we have fights around the holidays. But of course, like most families, we find our way through it. I love this country. I deeply love this party. I love you guys. And love is what families are all about.
Yeah, I love you guys too. So, I mean, but when you listen to that, it was almost like there was a laugh line or an applause line, Tim, that was written into the speech, and then one person in the crowd said, "Oh shit, I better get going," and started the room. That awkward, I guess you call it applause and cheering, but there was this really, it was almost pushed right in the room.
And I think the prime minister was using his own well-honed barometer to measure the response in the room. And when you see that kind of delay, as you pointed out, Dave, that should reinforce, okay, I should try to find my exit with some dignity, with some degree of control, but move soon. Look, power and leadership is an on-off switch. There's no I'm contemplating and reflecting. You're either leading or you're out of the way. And what will happen, and I've been both one of the instigators and on the receiving end during my time in politics, other power centers develop. Those who want to be the next leader will be getting their campaigns ready. I remember when John Tory stepped down as Ontario PC leader, I moved fast, got my campaign manager, fundraiser, got caucus lined up behind me. That's happening, and that creates internal chaos if there are not some rules of the game. Then the MPs supporting those other candidates will be emboldened to come out, go after the prime minister, and make the situation worse. And the third game you play is you try to mold the rules of the leadership to your advantage. If you feel you're the front runner, you want it sooner. How memberships can be sold, when the cutoff will be. All of that stuff will be now the focus of every energy. We're going through a trade crisis with the States. I think the prime minister will end up landing in the right spot. My guess is, like Dalton McGuinty, that resulted in Kathleen Wynne coming in, will say he's stepping down when a new leader is in place, and then they'll trigger a date for that leadership.
I want to draw on your experience, though, Kathleen, in terms of dealing with a finance minister, and the narrative all week long was every first minister who deals with a finance minister locks horns at some point. You don't always disagree. You're not always singing from the same hymnal. But were you ever at a point where you were able to say, yeah, I like you, but, can you deliver the fall economic statement, and then I'll fire you the next day? That seems to be deeply entrenched in terms of that disagreement. How they could have got to that point it astounds me.
Yeah, well, I don't think that happened overnight. I think, to what Tim was saying, that this had been going on for some time. I mean, Charles Sousa and I didn't always agree. We often did, and there were others who disagreed with us. But it was a back and forth, and it was a discussion, and it was a working out of a plan to go forward. So obviously there had been a lot of issues that the Prime Minister and Chrystia Freeland had been dealing with, and as I say, I think this was the final straw. And the way the shuffling of her out of finance was handled was so undignified, and she really, I don't think anybody can fault her for what she did. And I think that the letter she wrote, because it was so strong, because it was so articulate, and because she made a point of saying that she's staying, I think the leadership kind of flagpole has been planted, as Tim was saying. So I think that's all very true. But there are two things I want to say. First of all, that clip of the Prime Minister at the Christmas party, I've heard it mocked, and I've heard it, I've heard it dismissed over the last few days, and I understand it was awkward, it was difficult, but don't underestimate how challenging it was for him to walk into that room. He is the leader. They are his Liberal family, for better or for worse. And when he says he loves those guys, that's true. He does. And they love him at some level, even though there is so much pain and division in the party right now. That doesn't mean that there isn't deep affection. So I think we need to cut him some slack on that. I think that he is thinking about what he's going to do, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if he decided to leave. The comments about a pending cabinet shuffle, I don't know whether that changes the reality that he may leave or not. Anyway, I just think that we need to think of the context of him in that room. The last thing I want to say is that, to John's point, the huge issue right now is that we cannot go on in this disarray. We've got Trump kind of, approaching the border. We know that the trade conversation at least has to be attended to, but the whole relationship is so precarious right now. So we really, as a country, we need our house in order. The premiers cannot carry the day. The premiers can be backup, and the premiers are important in terms of that conversation with their counterparts in the states, the governors and the members of Congress, but they're not the lead. The Prime Minister has to be. So we really need to know what's going on. And I think the fact that so many people in this country are paying attention signals how important this is.
Okay, then given that, the need to have that leadership, is he the guy, Kathleen? Is Trudeau the guy that has to be sitting at that table, or does he need to actually address the nation, step up and say, for the good of everything, for what's coming down the pipe on January the 20th, we need to do this?
Well, he needs to step up and say that, and whether that is, I'm going to leave and somebody else is going to take over, or whether that is, this is the plan to deal with this relationship. One or the other needs to happen. We need to know what is going on. I can't presume to get inside the Prime Minister's head. I don't know what he's planning to do, but one way or the other, we need to know who is in the leadership seat, or is there going to be a process where we'll have someone in the leadership seat by March? Because we can have a leadership between now and March. That's not impossible. Tim talked about when Dalton stepped down. I know it's only one province, but still the infrastructure is there. It took us 3 months to have a leadership race, and that was a delegated convention. This is a different and perhaps more efficient process. So we need to know one way or the other. That's how I'm feeling as a liberal, Dave. I'm feeling like I just want to know what the heck we're doing, and only the Prime Minister can tell us that.
John, the whole question around confidence, though, is critical here. And you know, I heard somebody talking about this the other day, and who is not necessarily as deeply engaged in this conversation as we four. I mean, they're going on with their lives, but this is top of mind in terms of conversation and discussion. And the confidence question is the issue here. And I thought Chrystia Freeland made that abundantly clear in a very artful way in terms of the way she wrote that letter, crafted that letter. And I realize a lot of people saying that she launched her salvo for leadership. I'm not sure that was her initial intention. Her issue is confidence in the Prime Minister and his lack of confidence in her. What's your read across the board in terms of where we are as just the general electorate, the general Canadian who is looking at this? Is confidence that much of an issue?
Well, they lost confidence in this Prime Minister and this government a long time ago. I mean, let's make no mistake about it that he, from an electoral point of view, he's dead man walking. And if he continues to lead this party, the party will be too. So I want to be a bit contrarian in all of this. If I were sitting in that cabinet office and everybody had left the room and Katie Telford was sitting across from me and maybe a couple of others, I'd probably be on the side of saying, look, Prime Minister, you need time. You need some time to not only reflect and do what you want to do, but also we are a government. We've got border security things to announce in 24 hours. You need a finance minister. We want to keep people in line. So we're holding over the head of caucus another 9 seats that could be in cabinet. And we need to put some things in place, run out the clock in the House, which he did. And you have until January the 27th before the House is required to come back. You also have options in terms of proroguing the House, but it gives you some space to decide whether you want to call that leadership convention or not. In fact, I mean, it's kind of weird to say this, but he has time enough to actually send some ministers to Washington and get some preliminary feedback and things, and actually attend the inauguration. Get that? January the 20th. The House doesn't, come until January the 27th. So the question really is, what is the process? And I think he's bought some time. Everybody's outside going, decide. But I'm inside the room saying, well, you can decide, but that also then sets a whole series of things in motion. And we need to set up a process to have your decision either way. The second part of the decision is that he says, no, I'm not going. And as a result of that, what I'm going to do is my legacy will be Team Canada, where I convince Mr. Trump to back off the tariffs and I get some kind of a deal. I know it's folly to think that way, but the reality is that he could come back and do that, or he could actually on the 26th day of January say, I am leaving. Here's my replacement. Here's when the convention is going to be. It doesn't leave a lot of time, but we can do that. I will prorogue the House, and I wish everyone, God bless for the rest of the year. So he's got a month and a bit to do this. It's up to him as to which way he wants to go on it.
Yeah, Tim, a morning that it all unfolded on Monday this week, that was sort of the second thing that came to mind. Prorogue Parliament, do it now. And all I could think is nobody looking at the calendar? To John's point, right? Tactically, there's no rush to do this. In fact, I've heard, more recently, he doesn't want to step down too closely to the Freeland letter, because then it makes him look like he was pushed out for whatever reason. But even if that were to happen today, proroguing Parliament or stepping down, I'm not sure that he had to do that. There is time. There is let this thing breathe and let us take a good look at what's going on.
I disagree. The pushing doesn't get less; it gets more, right? So, I described the Freeland letter as an epic gunshot to the gut that is not survivable. And the sooner you face that instead of a slow bleed, the better it's going to be for the Liberal Party. But more importantly, the better it's going to be for our country as a whole. You will see, if he does make up his mind soon, knowing political animals, more and more jumping on the bandwagon and undermining his leadership, not running off in all directions. If I'm a potential aspirant to the position, I'm going to volunteer my way out of cabinet to keep as much distant from Prime Minister Trudeau as possible. I really think there's only one path that the Prime Minister needs to say. He'll be stepping down as leader. He sent a letter to the Liberal Party of Canada to give them that intention so they can set an appropriate leadership date. If that date is beyond when the House is to come back, then he can prorogue. But I really think it's that 1, 2, 3. I really don't see another alternative that's not going to cause more chaos and put us further off our footing when it comes to negotiating with President Trump.
Kathleen, when would you advise Trudeau, if he's still on the job, to go to the inauguration?
To have another awkward moment.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, I think it'll be tough. But I think this is a guy who likes to walk into tough situations. I mean, I think he kind of prides himself on having that kind of strength, that kind of emotional strength. So I don't know whether I would advise him to go. I think that, if he's still in that job, Dave, he's got to go. The leadership of Canada has to be at the inauguration. In this moment, I don't think that we have an option. So, maybe that's one of the things he's staying on to do. I can't answer that question, but we need someone in the Prime Minister's chair in the leadership role at the inauguration. And I don't think Trudeau would shy away from it.
Can I just go ahead, John. Another thing? I'd be interested in the feedback, but if you've got this time and you want to make that announcement somehow, maybe during the Christmas break, I mean, you have to have, you now have the time of process to, as I said, to unfold things. There's an opportunity even now to have chosen who's going to be your interim leader of the party and of the government of Canada. You could be sitting with them in your office right now on a daily basis, bringing them up to speed on a whole series of things. You could have them having their hand in who to choose for the cabinet, because it's not like it can all be dissolved in one moment. So I'm interested in the process more than anything else. I mean, both of you have sat with leadership, and we're all agreed this is dead man walking politically. The question is, how do you then take a government or take a nation, particularly in the face of tariffs and Mr. Trump? How do you process that even over for the next 2 weeks? And you've got the time. And it's a scenario I've proposed right now where you're sitting, taking all the steps to do that. Is that pretty much what you're doing at this stage?
Yeah, go ahead, Tim. I'm going to say no, but yeah, go ahead.
I agree with Premier Wynne that the Prime Minister, whether that's Justin Trudeau or whoever the acting leader is, has to be at the inauguration. You need your all-star team that is then going to, when the Prime Minister changes, Lease will be in place to continue discussions. There's no choice on that matter. I was going to throw a random point on too, and look, I wonder if Jagmeet Singh's leadership is in a lot of trouble. They continue to be decimated in by-elections. They've gained nothing. And, the notion that he would even contemplate propping up a government, allowing some other prime minister who's not elected to continue on is beyond me. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. So the circus with the Liberals is distraction enough. But boy, if you can't gain traction on the left with this very unpopular government, I got to think New Democrats are questioning their leader as well.
Well, this week, I mean, aside from all of the drama that went on with the inside backroom going on with the Liberals, the NDP were front and center in terms of what they were going to do, and Anne-Marie Mediwake did her best to chase Jagmeet Singh around the table to nail him down and talk about exactly what it is he's going to do and why he would not commit to voting non-confidence.
But I don't understand still. Is, to quote Gwen Stefani, what you waiting for? Like, what's the holdup? Why wouldn't you just trigger an election? Are you not ready? Is your party not ready for an election?
Absolutely ready, but I'm not going to speculate about when that's going to happen. I'm not going to be a pundit and talk about election dates. What I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to do for people.
You're a leader. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, but I'm not going to speculate. I don't know what the votes are going to be. I don't know what they're going to be presenting us. So I'm not going to box myself in.
Okay.
But what I can tell people is there will be an election in 2025.
Sure.
And I'm ready to fight it. And people have an important choice to make.
You've said on this program and many times before, this will be a case-by-case basis. Mm-hmm. What's the case that would see you continue to support them?
Well, like I said, I don't want to speculate on it. But if we've got scenarios
what still do you need from them? I get what you were getting before from the supply and confidence agreement, dental care, pharmacare, but what do you still need from them that would garner your support and confidence?
Well, here's a concrete scenario. We've got Trump coming in at the end of January, and he's going to impose tariffs. Do we vote on retaliatory tariffs to say, no, we're not going to take that. We're going to fight back, but it's going to cost you. If you think that you can put tariffs on us and get away with no harm, it's going to hurt you. It's going to cost Americans. It's going to raise the cost of items in America. So we've got a choice between a vote on retaliatory tariffs or triggering an election. And what's in the best interest of Canadians? What's in the best interest of hundreds of thousands of workers who say, well, I don't want my jobs to be at risk. I want you to fight back and protect my jobs. I don't know what's going to happen. And so that's why I'm not going to speculate. But what I am going to say is there's going to be that an election. And in that election, people will have that choice. You Democrats who want to bring down the cost of your groceries, want to build homes that you can afford. Conservatives want to let CEOs rip you off even more. That's an important choice.
Last question. Given the mess that we're in right now, what we've seen happen, reading that letter, do you regret not bringing down this government sooner?
No regret.
No regrets, John. What do you think of that strategy?
Well, again, two things. I'm sorry, I have to revert to process. And that is, I mean, part of this is to say, look, I can't bring down the government by just calling for the government to be brought down. There has to be a process. So we'll wait until January the 27th, and we'll wait for the first confidence motion, and we'll make sure that we're there to represent to bring a new government to Canada. I mean, I punt it down the field kind of that way. Having said all of that, I mean, Jagmeet Singh needs to get the supply bill passed in the Senate, right? Like, I mean, he needs that to be done to incorporate all of the things that the Liberals have passed. So I would agree with your premise. I mean, they're tied, both the Liberals and the NDP are tied nationally way down at the end of the voting scale. Number two, the massive majority that we're going to see, quite possibly of the Conservatives, will rival anything that Brian Mulroney had in 1984 and 1988. So that's a given. The question really is, what is the mechanism to do this? And let me throw another wrench into it, because we talk a lot about Trump. What the next leader is going to be faced with is likely the Parti Québécois in power in Quebec, and the Bloc Québécois is the official opposition, which is then going to set up for a potential referendum, yet again on sovereignty association. So, you know, outside of the chaos we have with Trump, outside of the economic fallout that we are experiencing from this, outside of the tariffs that we're dealing with, we have a lot of challenges that this country is going to meet within the next year. And I think we're going to be politically exhausted by the end of even half of that.
Well, I'm not sure, Kathleen Wynne, that it's good enough for Jagmeet Singh, though, to say, well, there's going to be an election anyway. It doesn't matter.
I just think he looks incredibly weak, Dave. I think that he just looks like he doesn't know what the plan is. If I were an NDP member, I'd be really disappointed in his lack of strategy. I think it's incomprehensible how you say the prime minister has to go, but I have no idea what I would vote him down on. You know, Anne-Marie's question about what is the thing that would cause you to support him or not support him, and that he doesn't have an answer to that. I just think looks incredibly weak, but I think he's looked weak for months, actually. I want to go back to John's question about, the who goes to Washington and what happens in that process. Tim, when you were the leader of the opposition and Dalton stepped down, he stayed as the premier. He was still the premier through that leadership race, right? So I stepped out of cabinet. Glenn Murray stepped out of cabinet. We left cabinet because I remember having to figure out how to park at Yonge. Driven since 2006 in the city. It's like, holy shit! I got to figure out how to get into this parking lot. Anyway. So he was still the premier. So there is a scenario, John. The point I want to make is there's a scenario where the prime minister makes it clear what's going to happen when he's, that he's going to leave, right, that there's going to be a leadership, and he still could be the prime minister who goes to Washington, right? Because he is the prime minister, he is the leader until he's not. So I think that, that's a scenario that we cannot rule out.
We did have similar with Premier Harris. He announced his resignation, stayed on as leader and premier until Ernie Eves was selected, and then there was a smooth handoff. Look, Kathleen, you may have a similar experience. It's a weird thing, Dave, that happens where when you're in the legislature, you develop bonds with folks, whatever party they're on. And while you'll scrap like a warrior in an election campaign, you also want them to be successful. And I got along great with Jagmeet Singh. It's good, chats outside of politics. But man, he looks like he's up to his nose now in quicksand and sinking faster. You know, my grandpa was a strong, hard-nosed union leader in the petrochemical sector out of Sarnia. And we taught politics at a young age. In fact, party I was most aligned with when I was in high school were the New Democrats, because my grandpa, he loved the happy warrior. I mean, he'd walk by Jesus in heaven to go shake hands with Tommy Douglas. He loved Stephen Lewis, and he would have loved Jack Layton. That's what the NDP needs, is Jagmeet's time to fight instead of looking like somebody who's just drowning.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, and I remember in our house it was a similar thing. My mom took me to Varsity Stadium, and we sat in the front row, and it was a Pierre Trudeau rally, and the prime minister came along and shook everybody's hand. So because we were there, we got to shake hands. And a week later, my uncle, who was a New Democrat, took me to a David Lewis rally and got to meet David Lewis. So, but you know, even there, John, we the vitriol around all of this, and there are people who are cheering for Trump and his trolling of Trudeau because they don't like the prime minister, is really, I mean, to say short-sighted is an understatement.
Well, yeah, it is. But on the other hand, I have always found in the polling that there's roughly 13%. And I stick on that number because it's the same number that was the anti-vax group, the virulent anti-Trudeau vote in covering that. And when you calculate out that, we have 35 million adults in this country, 13% is, 4.25 million people who are every single day want this prime minister to be defeated. And so, I think already the national polls have shown that 80% of the people in this country want Mr. Trudeau to be gone. And I think, you've got 1 in 10 of them, or a little more than that, in fact, who will use every measure possible, including the issue dealing with showing that Donald Trump, it would be good for Mr. Trudeau to go because he doesn't belong there. I think the other issue, though, that you put the finger on is, he's trolling Canada on a consistent basis. Premier Ford is called out the Americans and called out Mr. Trump occasionally. He's either being very humorous by calling it that, by calling us the 51st state, or there's something more to this. I don't know. I guess my response would be, look, if we were a member of the United States, I'm not sure we'd be suffering from tariffs. And the second thing is, if you really want us to have to be their 51st state, there's going to be 13 parts of it that you're going to have to figure out. But the reality is that there's these. I don't know exactly what the game is, but outside of Premier Ford, and maybe that links us to Ontario, I don't see anybody else really in this country calling out the president-elect and actually taking it to his court.
Well, the premier has been doing his media tour in the United States. We've seen him on Fox News a couple of times over the last couple of weeks. This week on CNN with Aaron Burnett. And, again, answering those questions around Trump's trolling and calling Trudeau the governor of the 51st state, et cetera. And for the most part, the premier, I think, played the party line in as much as he said, well, President-elect's got a sense of humor. We just want to get a deal, and that's the right language. But I just want to pull the clip out of this because Aaron Burnett got into the whole question around cutting off energy to the United States from Ontario. And then she went down the rabbit hole around oil. And I want you to listen to this clip and tell me if I misunderstood what she said.
60% of America's total oil imports come from Canada. So do you want to go bigger in this? If these tariffs are going to go through, should you reciprocate with tariffs, not just on electricity, but on crude oil itself?
Well, we ship down 4.3 million barrels every single day. If there was a tariff on that would increase gas by $1 a gallon.
I got to give credit to the premier's comms team because he was very well prepared in terms of the answer that he was going to get when it came to oil. But Tim, there's a complete misunderstanding on Aaron Burnett's part of exactly what it means in terms of putting tariffs on oil. We wouldn't be putting tariffs on our own oil. It would be the Americans putting tariffs on the oil. Like, she has turned that completely upside down. She doesn't fucking get it.
Oh, maybe didn't Trudeau though do that in the 1970s? Trudeau the Elder put on an export tariff, I thought. But anyway, so look, I think like Finance Minister Bethlenfalvy, maybe Premier Ford's team are watching On the Ledge, because this is the advice we gave last week. That the Premier should make clear the impact on American consumers and businesses if we get into tariff war. Nobody wins by a tariff war. Nobody wants it. When you go to the extent of saying we're going to cut off electricity, we're going to stop the oil, we're not going to buy American wine, I think that throws too much oil on the fire. No pun intended by that. And that's a step too far. So I think the tone he struck there was dead on, and I hope he sticks with it.
Kathleen?
Yeah, I know. I agree. I think that she didn't actually know what she was asking. And to John's point, he knew exactly what he wanted to say. And I think it hit the right tone. I think the issue of cutting off the power supply or cutting off energy supply to the states creates division within our own country, and that's not helpful. So I think sticking to the impact that it's going to have, any of this is going to have on people in the United States. That's certainly the tack that we took in the first round of negotiations. I know this is a different round, and it's already escalated beyond what we saw in 2016-17. So I think that what Ford said was that's the right way to go. And, as I said before, it's fine that Doug Ford is doing this. There is a leadership vacuum right now, unfortunately. We need soon to have a prime ministerial voice speaking for the whole country, because, Doug Ford can't speak for Danielle Smith on this, quite frankly. There's a different interest, and so we need a unified voice.
Well, John, to that point, though, all the first minister sat at the table there on Monday afternoon, and they had their briefing with the media after their meetings, et cetera. And Danielle Smith and Scott Moe, they certainly made it sound like Doug Ford was speaking for them. He got all kinds of kudos at that table.
Well, he did. And that photograph of him at the top of the table with all the media shoving microphones in from the sides, and the table, as it was, is going to be iconic. What an incredible photograph that was. He is, at the top of the table, leading all of the premiers across this country. But I think, let me throw another. I'm that guy in the corner talking process. The other issue is the speculation that he was going to go early for an election. This kind of throws everything, into the back rooms to start machinating about, I thought we were going to be able to get in before Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Poilievre had a set to, or the Liberal Party. We didn't anticipate what's happened, and so there's a leadership issue there. Do we go now? Early, into March or something. I mean, the last time I checked, Bill Davis had, his election that went from a minority to a majority in March, because I was an intern and kind of experienced that. So we do have time. Do we do it to say that we want to strengthen our hand so that we can negotiate in the United States? Like there's a timing momentum here that's underlying everything else that people are speculating about, because the question is whether or not Doug Ford and his government see that this is an opportunity, so that depending upon what Mr. Trudeau says in the next 30 days, he may also say, you know what, it's time to go as well and get this mandate in a matter of chaos. We can't have the country, listing the way it is, and we can't do this without a strong voice for Canada. And there you are. So there's another tier to this three-dimensional chess that I'm sure the backroom is machinating about today.
Well, Tim, to that point, and we talked about, some breathing room in terms of how the prime minister is reacting to what's going on in Ottawa. The premier does not have to move quickly here. I mean, there may be some sense in saying, we're just going to play out the mandate here. And, 18 months from now, we'll get a better picture of exactly what's going on. In the meantime, I can deal with Trump and Ottawa from a position of strength, given where I am in the polls right now.
This is a really tough call, right? And so there's no doubt that Premier Ford is getting daily pressure from the Hawks, who want to trigger an early election to extend the mandate. The chief argument of the Hawks, of course, is that Poilievre is going to become prime minister, and to control spending, he's going to have to make some tough decisions. And those tough decisions will happen just when we're going back to the polls provincially and cost us seats. That's the Hawks. The Doves are why take a chance? Look what happened to David Peterson and the caucus members who won narrowly. They'll be worried about keeping their seats. So all that pressure on the Premier's shoulders. Look, I think the Hawks case is actually strengthened, though. I think that the way that Premier Ford, the exception of going to boycott, has been the star performer on the stage in this current crisis with the Trump administration. The other parties do not look prepared for an election campaign. And I get the point about running against a tough call on federal budgets down the road. So that pendulum that Doug Ford is playing with all the time, I think it's moved towards February, March of 2025.
Kathleen Wynne, when we look at what's going on, though, with the federal Liberals and the content in that gathering, I've heard conversations saying, well, there's a bunch of Liberals there who still want to be in government, but maybe they would, wave the flag for Bonnie Crombie and, be star candidates in a provincial election for the Liberals.
There may be some of that, Dave. I think that Doug Ford it was lucky for him that he happened to be in the chair of the Council of the Federation. It's a rotating chair. Nobody elected him to the chair of the Council of the Federation of Premiers. It rotates among the provinces. So it just happened that he was in the chair at this point. And it's lucky for him. And he may decide, and this would, I guess, be an argument on the Dove side that Tim's talking about, to ride this out, because he won't get this chance again to be in this very pivotal position in terms of speaking for the country, really, for the moment, on the relationship with the United States. So they may see this. His people may see this as enough of a situation or a position of strength for him that he actually can ride out whatever the Greenbelt, whatever the RCMP comes back with, because I think, yes, he doesn't want to run when Poilievre is the prime minister, but he also wants to get ahead of whatever the RCMP is going to say about his dealings with developers in the Greenbelt. So that, you can't ignore some of the internal domestic problems that he's got. But they may just feel that he's doing so well, and this position of the chair of the Council of the Federation at this moment has handed him an opportunity to look like a statesman that nothing else would have done. So it's lucky for him, and we'll see who wins in that Dove Hawk argument.
John, to Kathleen's point, how much would this conversation have changed in terms of the tone vis-a-vis the tariffs and the trade, et cetera, if, say, for example, Blanchette or Moe or Smith were at the head of that table?
I'm not sure of the question.
Well, I mean, we're taking our lead from Doug Ford because he leads the premier's table right now. If there were another premier at that table, for example, Danielle Smith has a clearly different view in terms of her relationship with the United States and oil exports, et cetera.
Or Legault, who doesn't even believe in Canada, right? So,
well, you know what? Much to the undercurrent here, he's the current premier of Ontario has fallen into a good place. I mean, he is playing Captain Canada. He's done that since he walked out the door on the very first tweet that Donald Trump made about what was coming down the highway. I think it does give him a great amount of opportunity within the next few months to pull the trigger and to go. I think also to the points that the Liberals and the NDP are also going to not benefit from what's going on federally. I mean, they will be carrying at the door people who say, I don't want to be part of a party that federally can't make up its mind on whether or not it wants to keep or turf Mr. Trudeau. And also Bonnie Crombie and the group of them. I mean, the argument about whether they've got a tax reform for Ontario or not that blunts some of the criticism from Mr. Ford versus Liberals can't manage anything. It's always in chaos. Let's bring some stability and bring some, the other question is, will the public and the electorate say, you know what, I'd rather have Bonnie Crombie dealing with Trump than Doug Ford? So he's fallen into a really fortuitous situation. And the question is, how does he manipulate this? And I mean that in a good way. How does he manipulate this in order to ensure that he's got full cabinet solidarity, which you would have, but taking it to the field as a team that's going to be able to do this better than anybody else?
Well, it will be all fun and games until the crying's over, or whatever the phrase is. So we'll leave it there. This is the ultimate edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. So Merry Christmas, and thanks to you, Tim Hudak. It's good to have you in the chair, and Kathleen Wynne and John Wright. And we miss our buddy Keith Leslie, but he promises to be back in the new year. And to those of you who watch and listen, feel free, subscribe, give us a comment, and we'd love to have you, part of the show. You can hit the talk back button on my website, davetrafford.com. In the meantime, I'm going to give you permission just to dial it back, take some time to breathe, maybe even turn off the radio, the TV, the feeds and the news and all that for a few days anyway, because you know what? It'll all catch up to you when we flip the calendar. And I'll give you one example. This week, I revisited The Moth, M-O-T-H, The Moth. And it's a podcast series that's all about storytelling and storytellers. And I stumbled on one this week, and it was all about in service, being in service of others. And it was just by accident I found it, but it is this time of year when we're all in service to each other, and we emphasize that through the holidays. And I want to thank those of you who stepped up and supported St. Clair Inn. So we're well on our way of not only meeting our goal and fundraising, but surpassing it. So those of you who have stepped up and done so, whether it's attending our concert series for the Promise or just donating to St. Clair Inn, thank you. And if it's not St. Clair Inn, think of the others whom you can be in service of, and do your part. Yeah, turn it off. But I would direct you to that podcast, The Moth, and listen. It's about 4 episodes ago, late November, early December, the one about service. Nice tone for this season. All right, that'll do it for us. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford, and from all of us at Story Studio Network, have a great holiday, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.